Hi, I'm Giselle Hatta, and you are watching us at the Vanport Mosaic Festival here on Tuesday. And we've had a big festival, not like the festival we had planned. We thought we were going to be in person at the North Park blocks, but the heat kind of made it be otherwise. So this is, I think, one of our last events here on Facebook, and we're so glad that you could join us this year for the Vanport Mosaic Festival, curated with Laura Laforti. And I am very happy to have with me, not us, with me, we are us, Bruce, Bruce Poinsett. And we actually hadn't met, but we had this gathering of people who were going to be involved in the festival in one way or another. And as you were leaving, you were talking about really being interested in, the conversations that you lead. You've done so much. I've been so impressed by all that you've done. But on that conversation, you happen to talk about wanting to connect more with intergenerational voices. And that's actually one of the first times that I heard a younger person, no, take that back. It wasn't actually the very first time, but one of the first times. And it sounded like an invitation to me. And so I gave you a call, and here we are.
Yep. And I'm glad you reached out to me about that. Everyone on Bruce Poinsett. And my pronouns are he, his. And yeah, just as Giselle mentioned, this is us, them, we dialogue across difference. And it started again from, a meeting where just threw out the idea of just doing kind of like intergenerational, cross-cultural conversations. And, we went from, we hadn't really met before, but, Giselle reached out to me and was like, let's do this. Let's do this for the, as part of this is now the sixth, if I'm correct, sixth annual Vanport Mosaic Festival. And this is actually, as I found out tonight, the last day of live festivities. So, I'm not sure if that was a horn to celebrate, but we'll treat it as such.
Okay, something happens on my computer where I don't know how to turn it off. So.
No worries.
Okay.
We just play it off. Play it off like it was all planned.
So people can kind of see our differences by looking at us, and not focusing so much on differences, but really what we talked about is we talked about many things the first time we connected. We made a whole outline. See, everybody, we have a whole outline. But then we said, why should we follow the outline exactly, right? I mean, it's so important that we have conversations. And as we're coming, hopefully out of this pandemic or transitioning into life in a different way, we're going to be bringing many lessons that we have gotten during this period of time that we've been away from each other during this 15 months of being away. So there's just kind of so many lessons, but one that we talked about was just, how do you have a conversation? How do you talk to each other? And what's the value in that? And you certainly have been having a lot of conversations about a lot of different topics around with a lot of different people. And I just think it's commendable to you, Bruce, on the amount of work that you've been doing during this period to bring people and that maybe we wouldn't have known about.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, just to kind of add to that point with these conversations, I think, and we're going to kind of talk about what really like brought us into more like the organizing abolitionist space as we kind of go on with this conversation, but just to kind of like bring things back. I think as far as like with purpose, unity is a word that gets thrown around a lot. It's it's obviously a great goal to aspire to. It's what, unity, solidarity, you know, marginalized people, especially moving together to overcome these systems of oppression. You know, these are great ideals, but it's a lot harder, in practice. We all have like both within, you know, our respective identities and all the different identities, we bring with us. Just within those spaces, there's a lot of tension, baggage, a lot of stuff that we're dealing with, a lot of stuff that we're dealing with internally, not to mention with each other, never mind across these differences. So you know, how do we help bridge those gaps? How do we do the work that's, is not glamorous, it's not overnight. It's, it does take time. And I I don't like to necessarily like glorify conversations because I think sometimes, especially in, this world of, we have like, DEI as an industry, sometimes, we make these things seem like the end all be all. But I think it is important to build relationships and build, and that does start in a lot of cases with conversations, but also real conversations. And, we talked last night, just a little bit of a check-in about this, that one of the things we want to do with this conversation today is just have like, even though it's, obviously we're being live streamed right now. And, to some degree, there's a show to that. We want it to be a real conversation. We want it to be, I think we always feel like we're, whether we're on, video system like this or, on social media, it always feels like even if it's two people talking, we're always performing for an audience watching, and it's dictating how we're able to interact, and really just making our interactions inauthentic because we're afraid of whatever may come, and an inability, I guess, to reconcile with that or reconcile when these things get messy. So we're trying to do something, just I would say, I almost feel a little too grandiose saying we're modeling it, but we're trying to at least attempt to have, as real a conversation as we can have while also still being, putting on a spectacle for people.
I
Just how would you like to add anything to that?
Well, I just want to lift that up because I think this period that we're coming out of, we've had to really go inside of ourselves more, and different people, of course, different communities, whether we were protesting or dealing with pandemic, dealing with life and death, just dealing with this, past year and maybe even beyond, of really assessing what's important. What do we really value, right? With ourselves, with our families, and with each other and with our communities, and how can we move that forward, as you're saying, in an honest, reflective, and personal way. So I'm hoping that we don't lose that, but that's kind of, what is pushing us forward as we keep exploring with each other. And, just what I loved about, we can talk about all the ways that we're different, but to me, now it's most important to talk about how we come together, and maybe the things that have kept us apart for one reason or another, but that little extra push or a little extra effort that we all need to make. For me, I feel like it's a real personal, commitment to reach out to people that maybe I haven't in the past, or that's why I feel this conversation is really important, because we really need to take the time to talk to each other, and not only talk to each other, but to listen. I think listening to each other is is so very important. And sometimes we don't have the skills or even the patience to do that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, I think just for framing purposes for people, before we kind of like get into, I know we talked about having an outline that we were going to follow kind of, but before we kind of get into like those discussion questions, it might be good for us both to kind of just briefly, you know, kind of like go over uh just like what like our backgrounds in, or at least in terms of engaging in kind of like, for lack of better terms, cross-cultural organizing. I can go first. uh yeah, so you know, I grew up in Lake Oswego, Oregon. As many people know, Lake No Negro, Oregon, which was the big influence on me becoming a part of group Respond to Racism LO in 2017. So I've been doing organizing primarily based kind of, you know, in the sort of suburbs, periphery area and around anti-racism. But then I've also been, my background's in writing. I worked at, you know, the Scanner, one of the two historically Black newspapers in Portland. And I've worked with a lot of nonprofits and, you know, justice organizations throughout the state for the last, it's 2021. So it's been a decade now. Wow. Yeah, in that time, I've, you know, you go across a lot of,
Sorry.
yeah, you work with a lot of people, and you get to, you know, especially working in like journalism or journalism related spaces, you just learn about a lot of different issues, a lot of different things. And, you know, again, you just cross a lot of different lines. So in a lot of ways, that's kind of been the basis of my work, again, for the better part of the last decade, is just, you know, constantly learning, trying to, you know, work towards, uh, you know, in some ways just like common goals, working towards, like I said, justice. And definitely, you know, I don't know if I'm in any more of an involved place than I was 10 years ago, to be honest, because the more you learn, the more you realize you don't know. But uh, yeah, that's kind of my background in a nutshell.
Well, back in the day, no, long, long ago, I was born in Des Moines, Iowa. And my birth in the middle of America is connected to the history of America's treatment of Japanese Americans during World War II. So along the West Coast, 120,000 Japanese and Japanese Americans were held in American concentration camps, my parents being two of those 120,000, and held in Poston, Arizona. And that's how I eventually ended up in Iowa. And you can imagine that there weren't very many little Japanese girls in Iowa. And there weren't very many Japanese American people. So I didn't grow up with a community. I didn't grow up with a family, really. I mean, I'm an only child, so I had my mother and father and other people around me. But I mean, in terms of extended family, because my mother had 8 brothers and sisters, my dad had 5, and so if we had been in California, so really my identity was shaped and challenged by learning about racism as a little Asian girl in Iowa, being one of few, wanting to be Linda, wanting to be white, and eventually, really exploring that. And it happened that I met my future husband in high school, and he's African American, and we ended up moving to Portland. And that's where I raised 4 children, now 5 grandchildren, had a career as an artist in teaching dance and being a performer, and also got very involved in the Asian American movement and the civil rights movement in the later 60s at the University of Oregon, organizing Asian Americans and working alongside of, the Black unions and the Native American. It was a very cultural mix of people. And it was when we were questioning our own identity and discovering so many things about ourselves and each other. So it was a very fertile time for me. And then when I left University of Oregon, I came to Portland, where I immediately thought, oh, well, we're going to all get together as Asian Americans, because that's what we did in Eugene. It didn't matter if it was Korean, Filipino, Vietnamese, we all came together, women and men, and, we're reading and writing and watching films and doing actions and holding potlucks and raising money and doing all the community organizing. And then I came to Portland and it was so divided. So the Chinese community kind of stayed together, the Japanese community and the Black community. So I kind of found myself like that, like I was bouncing all around until the Sansei, or the third generation, which I am, third generation Japanese American, got very involved in uplifting the history of our parents who didn't talk about the concentration camps, saying, you need to talk about this. This is American history. This is our history. This is why my identity got so lost for so long. This is why I don't speak Japanese. And so I got very deeply involved in what was then called the redress. Now a more familiar name is reparations, the redress and reparations movement, which when it's presented now, it's like, oh yeah, they passed a bill, they got some money, and that was that. But I worked on that for 17 years myself and with other people, here in Portland. And I guess I could just kind of seg from the redress reparations to what we're experiencing today with the Black reparations and the need for this country to kind of come clean with a racist history and the damage that has been done to not only people of color, but all Americans, really, of not getting the real history, the true stories of what America has done and what America is. So that's what you and I are working on now and keep working on, I think.
Oh man. So, there's a lot I want to respond to there. So I'm gonna try and go through it. Just it's interesting. Like you said, we basically we met for this conversation. We didn't know each other before, but just like the parallels in our experiences. You talk about being in Iowa, being an only child. I was an only child in Lake Oswego, Oregon, being, again, being a Black boy trying to navigate race in this place that, is especially known for excluding us. And, even also, graduated from the University of Oregon, and I think found a lot of, I was politically aware, and it was always something present in my house with my parents, and going through high school and everything. But I definitely also found a different level of political awareness at the U of O, and kind of once I was exposed to oh, you have a whole section of your building with different different cultural student groups. You have this university library where because I did a lot of really digging into the Black Panthers, and not just their stories, but their reading lists, because that was kind of like a big thing of, I remember seeing Aaron Dixon, who was a captain in Seattle, I want to say, and he came when his book came out back when I was at the Scanner. He came and he was speaking, and he just talked about how their big thing was like, before anyone would let you touch a gun, they would give you this big stack of books that you had to go through. And I was always like, what a thought. But I say all that to say that, I was always interested in the like intellectual, kind of like the very like studious nature of what the Black Panthers were doing in their program as well. So when I went through, reading Eldridge Cleaver, reading Huey and others, and them talking, they were big on international solidarity and reading, what was happening in Algeria, reading about, what's happening in China, all these, different places, and building genuine like solidarity with these movements. So it was like, again, something that just like it connected with me in theory, but of course, like you said, but in practice is different because, coming from, growing up, I kind of knew like divides within just like the Black community, especially being, in Lake Oswego, and being like, I'm definitely disconnected from sort of the bigger Black community of Portland. And even within, LO, where there's not that many of us, like we're especially prone to buy into a lot of like white supremacist thought, both overt, subtle. So it's like we're not super connected, the few of us that are here. And having to like, there's a lot of like reprogramming even then, once you become aware of that, that you have to deal with. And it's part of like why I think I really believe in the idea of trying to like connect across, differences and whatnot, is just because in Oregon, we're the only state that had actually excluded Black people from living here. Like, especially when it comes to like, different like the Black diaspora and different Asian communities, there's that famous picture of like the redlining sign. And what does it say? It is, quote, Orientals and Blacks, right? Like our history as far as exclusion and discrimination in this state is actually very much linked together, you know. And we're going to talk about, other stuff like minority myth and all that later. But even at my alma mater, at our alma mater, they were talking about changing the name of the building of Dede Hall, which they've now changed to University Hall. But, for those who don't know, Matthew Dede, who that was named after, was, the architect of those exclusion laws. And when they originally tried to rename the building a few years ago and declined to, one of the reasons they gave was saying, well, Dede later on in his life changed his mind about Chinese people, except we're talking about Black exclusion laws. And it's just like the fact that that was kind of like used, like there's so much to unpack, in that, where it's just like, okay, we're talking about one thing, you're talking about another. I can't help but this feeling like, are you just like pitting us against each other again in just that most subtle offhand way? Are you like grouping us together and our issues together in a very disingenuous, like we talk about solidarity and then there's something like that where it's not, it's a different thing. But that kind of segues into, again, our loose outline here, where one of the things we wanted to talk about was specifically like, what prevents us, we just talk about our the different identities we bring into the room, what prevents us from working together, right? And, I've been kind of filibustering here, so I want to just kick it over to you.
Yeah, it really rang true to me when you're talking about the pitted against each other, because sometimes it's us doing it to us, but a lot of times it's them doing it to us and we buying it as us. And I think that when we talked about, it's kind of like a competition, right? Well, you've suffered more than we've suffered, or we've suffered more than you've suffered. And it's just not the discussion we want to be having, because it's about racism in America and the tenets of racism and what it has done to all of us in how we've been educated, in the stories that have been left out, the histories that are not included or denied because they're quote unquote bad history, as if the histories that we have gotten are the good histories. And so I know that we could go into this more, but we touched on it just a little bit in our discussion about the use of the term model minority. And that has really been, the coat that was given to Asians, I think even more. Here, try this on and wear this because you've done so well. I mean, if everybody would just be like you and do like you, we just wouldn't have these problems. And what does that say? What does that say to a people, a community? And, we already have like historic reasons to be divided. But I like to kind of flip that sometimes and go like, well, we have all these reasons to be connected, because maybe on a global perspective, we would have been more divided because our countries would have been far apart. But here we are in America, we're closer together. Sorry for the ding. And we have an opportunity, right, to explore this. So I think that I like to think of that as a challenge to us as people of color. So raising up during this period of time, the Black, Indigenous people of color. I don't really like the acronyms. I think that, first of all, the Indigenous people to America must be honored, and that history must be uplifted in order for us to truly move forward. And all the people that came here as people of color have those same histories of being stolen, lands being stolen, culture being stolen. And so we've got a lot to still manage our way through to get to hold out our hands to each other. Not impossible though, because look at the shit we survived. Sorry. But I think when I think of white people that are maybe reacting to a fear, and the fear is that there's going to be more people of color in America very soon. And I like to think of it not as a fear, but as an opportunity to get another foundation to build a country that is built on words that have a lot of meaning, that should have actual application of the meanings. That was a lot. I know I said a lot right there, but then again, not.
Oh, not. I don't think that was long at all. It's funny when you talk about that fear of, was it majority, minority country? I know they keep changing the years. For a while, it was like by 2045, it'll be this, or by 2043. I haven't checked the last one, but I do think it's important, it's one of those big picture things to keep bringing up to people, because feel like we spend a lot of time, especially, you know, in, 24/7 news cycle, in the situation where we have so many different, social media outlets, and there's so many different things competing for our attention. It is harder to kind of come back to the big picture. And it's very much related to this idea of like what prevents us from, working together, even being able to attempt to work together. And I think it's important, you know, obviously it's not the greatest thing in the world when you have, millions of people across this country who are essentially like yelling for your extermination or your expulsion. And they're rallying for civil war, they're rallying for these things. And it's not, it's not I'm not being dramatic about that. Like they've been very explicit and they've acted upon it. And you have, report after report of, yes, and you have many people who sympathize or are part of this, who've infiltrated all levels of law enforcement, the military, government, et cetera, which is not a revelation. We've all known this, we've been there, we've dealt with them. But, recognizing this and recognizing, okay, all our things we got to bridge, we got to work on that, because it's not going to, again, when we get in a situation where we're really, under pressure, like immediately, and we need each other, but that doesn't mean we're just automatically, in the name of unity, going to come together and everything's going to work. You got to build real relationships. But I think sometimes it helps to understand, remember this bigger thing this bigger system we're up against. Remember these bigger factors we're up against. If nothing else, because sometimes it's quieter. Right now we have I'm not going to call it an opportunity, but you have the added visual threat effect of, hey, you get to see people screaming for your extermination on TV every day if you needed a reminder of what's happening, for better or worse, right? So, that's where we are. But in terms of kind of getting back to, our experiences in terms of, what stops us. And even you talked about the acronym BIPOC earlier. And I was having a lot of like spirited conversations with people about this, just because on one hand, like I'm a copywriter as one of my freelance writing professions. So I understand in terms of just like ease for me, and like sometimes just not wanting to spell things out all the time, of writing an acronym is actually like a level of convenience. And in certain situations, like if we're just trying to like bring people to, shorthand for let's all get together, coming from certain people, it makes sense. However, I also deal with it, we're in Oregon, and we're in a place where, a lot of, especially working in like the art, nonprofit, industrial, complex space, where, let's just be real, you're dealing with a lot of white people who maybe like wittingly or unwittingly are kind of like using that to blanket us all together, or it becomes like this fundraising term. And there's this like, this is really like icky feeling. And again, it's not always like intentional or anything. It's just, the awkward interactions we have being people sometimes. But when you get in a room and it's like, oh, we're trying to determine, like a racist incident against a Black student will happen, or a Black person will happen, and the response will be from like an organization or something, well, we want to, do this for BIPOC people. But we're talking about anti-Blackness. How come we can't say Black? Like, you have those situations all the time. And what it really highlights is not so much the acronym, it highlights the power dynamics that are still in place, like who's in power. And the rest of us, it feels like, again, we're being pitted against each other, wittingly or unwittingly. And people, if there's white people in power who don't have to think about that, so they don't. So these situations keep happening,
I want to bring it kind of down to a personal level for me too. And I think that maybe this is part of why I have a resistance to saying BIPOC. I want people to say Indigenous, Black, people of color, or Asian American, Pacific Islanders, I mean, African Americans. I mean, it's not that difficult to say the term or say the name, which is I think, self-empowering choice of people of color in America, what we determine that we want to be called. And so on a personal level, it would be like, some people can't say my name. So Chisao was my maternal grandmother's name. And it's not a name that you would normally hear, right? Chisao. So I've had people say to me, oh, that's just too hard to say. So can I just call you Chi? Actually, no, you can't. So look at me and repeat after me. And I have a whole Chi, Sa, O. I have a whole lesson, and I have to like take my time to have them say it. And I have to be able to say to them, no, you're not going to determine what's comfortable for you to say, to call me, because that's not my name. My name is Chisao. So I want you to call me by my name, but it takes that extra effort, and it takes that moment of discomfort, and it takes that kind of standing up. And I mean, this is a simple example. This is my name, but I'm saying on a small, reflection of a larger issue. It's the same type of thing, that, white people have to do the work that they have to do. And I'm thoroughly of the belief that it's not our responsibility to do that. It's our responsibility now, and I feel it strongly as an artist, to reach out to other artists of color and other communities of color. And that may be in small ways, and it may be in larger organizing ways. But I think that when we come from a place of power, which means we as people of color in America have had to survive an immense amount of pain, suffering, denial, a loss of identity, loss of culture, erasure from our homes, stealing of land. I mean, the list goes on, right? So I think because of that, the character and the really the gifts that we can offer are immense. So I want to look at it from that side. And I think that we've had to go through listen to what I've been through. And it's hard to find that, I don't even want to call it balance, because one is not less important than the other, right? The struggle or the history or the omission is not any less important than where we are now in rebuilding systems, of looking at how the systems actually have not been working for anybody. If they're not working for people of color, they're most likely not working for anybody.
Exactly. And it's funny, you talk about just like the simple stuff of like, no, you will pronounce my name right. No, you will, respect. Like, I think about just growing up, my friends who were like Irish American were very, adamant about letting you know, it's like, yeah, I'm part Irish, I'm part, and we didn't, it wasn't like a weird thing. It was no one, there was other things, but it was like no one thought anything about it. And so that's why it's always weird to me when, you know, when it's not white people who would like you to actually respect their identity, to actually not just like tolerate that we're here. I would say I hate honestly the idea of like actually like welcome people, actually like embrace people, like not celebrate difference in like the weird kind of like I'm going to the zoo kind of way, but just like in the way of like actual humans. Like,
Well, actually humanity, that we need each other.
yeah,
We all need each other.
right. It's like that. It's not like this is this isn't some far off idea. This isn't something that people don't have, templates and ideas for. It's just that we've normalized the not treating the rest of us with humanity so much that it's that beaten into us that, any kind of, us asserting our agency is treated as this threat when it's just, again, just human behavior. And I like what you were saying too about, like there's an importance in talking about what we've been through and talking about, you know, just some of the, the horror stories, the bad things, but there's power in one uplifting stories, but then also, building together, doing this work. Like I said, artists of color, for example, just reaching out to each other, collaborating, where we can collaborate, doing these projects, exploring these conversations, building, actual, tangible, income, like building systems, structures, spaces to, celebrate each other, but also not just celebrate each other, but also, again, for us to make money together, for us to actually be able to, pay our rent, feed ourselves, feed our families, pay these bills, and, survive just like, again, anyone else, and thrive like anyone else. And there's a lot of, I think that's what's, especially like excites me about, having been able to work with Vanport Mosaic over these couple of years and watching, just these different examples of people who are, whether in like my age bracket or, and watching them, do these talks with like Kent Ford. Like that's awesome to me to watch that. Just like, that's just a normal thing, that's a normal thing in people's lives. Like it should be having these different exchanges where, again, we're sharing our different knowledge, we're building off of our different knowledge, but we're also building community while we're doing it, because that's what translates in the long run. That's, what I've learned kind of in just being involved in these organizing spaces is this idea that everything's good until it's not. Like we could come here and say, oh, we go to the same meeting, and I see you at the protest, and everything's good until, but we don't really know each other, and the moment we have a disagreement is war. Sometimes it's over big stuff, sometimes it's over the small little human awkward interactions we have. And but because, like I said, we don't have a real connection, you can watch like disaster happen. You watch a lot of like things that have all the potential in the world just unravel. You can watch people, infiltrate things. You can, just watch things dissolve, all kinds of bad outcomes, and, lost potential to make real radical systemic change. Not because people's hearts aren't in the right place, but because we've kind of lost this idea of how to interact with each other as humans. We're just in, whether it feels like we're performing for social media, or we're, trying to live up to all these ideals that we've studied while not kind of not having any grace for how hard it actually is in practice, not just for ourselves, but for those we interact with. And, the struggles we have in holding our own selves accountable. Like, I don't want to, again, I'm kind of filibustering here, so I don't want to get into a whole thing of, just wrestling with my own, just like my shortcomings and, being, a straight cis man and saying, okay, what internalized misogyny have I not really wrestled with or held myself accountable for? How is that showing up in my interactions? Or what are things where people are challenging me and I'm getting, my first response is to get defensive as opposed to, just having something else and saying, what does that mean? And how much more work do I have to do? While in the same time, understanding in some of those interactions, the person on the other side is not exactly waiting for you to do the work. It's just like, nah, we have beef now. And what do you do about that?
You get deeper into the beef. That's what you do. You get deeper into the disagreement, or then it just all circles around itself. But my question is, where in your education, outside of your family, we'll talk about that in a moment, but where in your, not just you, but I mean, when I think about education, were you taught how to explore your inner life, where you were taught how to express who you truly are? And for me, that's why the arts are so essential, and not just the arts as a craft. It's very important to have the arts, but as a tool to help us understand our inner life, as a way to express our inner life in an outer manifestation. So I feel like our education system lacks the ability to support human beings as the way they come into this world. We all come into this world just fully gifted and fully bright and fully talented. And what the heck happens? I think our education, a lot of times, takes it out of us because of the way it's been and continues to be. And that's another system that hasn't been working, right? Our politics, education, look at any system that we have, seems to be at a place where we need to really reassess, how is that coming out of our humanity? How is it beginning at that place to help us connect? And that's why I truly believe that change, real change, is going to happen just like you're talking about. Well, you're asking yourself questions about yourself, but how did you learn how to do that? How did you learn how to stop and think, is that me? Is it something I said? Is it something that I processed? Or how did I learn that particular point of view? Is it misogynistic? Is it feed into some other stereotype that I've had to wear? And how do I take it off? Where did you learn that, Bruce? Where did you learn how to do that?
I mean, I can't say, I don't think I learned anywhere formally as much as just from, I've just been, I've been lucky to have, good people around me. It's just kind of, who've, held me accountable, or who've challenged me and made me, and just kind of like, you have these situations where, again, that's not to say that I've been great or always reacted the best to these things. I'm human. I get defensive and all these things like anyone else. But you have time. I think also because I grew up so isolated, I've kind of been practiced at spending a lot of time to myself, thinking and kind of like replaying incidents and you know how could this have gone better? Especially with like I think you know yeah, growing up like an only child in like an isolated situation, just socially, I can't think of how many times I've replayed like, oh, I wish maybe that could have gone better, that could have gone better. So that kind of like translates into, you get older and you kind of take that same mindset of just like looking at situations and saying, okay, I don't know if it doesn't seem like there's actually a playbook for how to do this. So it sounds like the answer is trying to take stock of these situations and, you know, do some studying, do some, but also, again, I'm still trying to figure this out, what it means to hold yourself accountable in real time. Because I don't think I have, depending on who you talk to, I either have some modicum of understanding of that or I'm terrible. Like I said, it just depends, who you talk to. And it's, I think the bigger thing, the question I kind of have, not so much that's just kind of like posed to the world, is how do we put something in place to encourage that? Because it doesn't feel like we just don't have systems, or maybe we don't really advertise or just like encourage that kind of thinking. We reward, like, I just think about myself in like a media sphere, we reward like being loud and wrong. Are you first? Are you entertaining? Who cares about
money? Are you making
yeah
money? Mm-hmm.
are you got eyeballs? Okay, are you getting eyeballs on you? Then that's good. You're getting listens, good. But we don't really, again, we don't reward more thought to it. We don't, taking a little bit of time, taking you know not just like, it's fine to be wrong, but don't apologize for it. Don't grow. That's more of an issue, you know. So what, like, I don't have the answer as far as like how we build. All I can think of is just looking at my own life and saying, having someone there, having, who was there for me as far as like, whether it's my parents or other adult figures, or maybe, older kids or peers who, brought a certain element into my life or kind of like got me to think better. And like, how is that helpful? And where are situations where I can, maybe be that for someone else, or at least help be that for someone else? I'm a big proponent of, trying to do youth work or being involved, with young people in one way or another, whether it's just, there are programs like, I volunteered with SMART up until like the pandemic, and just reading with just reading with kindergartners, not because I think, oh my God, this is magically gonna turn someone into, the next Ta-Nehisi Coates or something. I don't know. It's reading with two kids for, it's like a half hour at a time. Like, but it does kind of establish a little bit of a relationship. And, in like Portland Public Schools, which is where I was volunteering with SMART, I also just happened to notice like most of the people volunteering, because, it's during the daytime, it's, during work hours, it's mostly white retirees. So it's just like, it's an opportunity, is being, it's one of the younger people there and being, like one of the few like Black men you see, at least especially like my age, in the space, at least where I've been, as far as just like in this like little reading program, it's just a little thing. And then also just like, I look at it as far as like, again, being from Lake Oswego and being, you know, helping in a small way bridge that gap of like, I'm trying to think of a, I know we said we're gonna have a real conversation. In my head, I was like, trying to think of a nice way to say this, but just, you know, not be one of those like, you know, Black people who just completely shuns everything, just trying to, I guess, be like, nah, we can actually traverse in the same spaces.
That
And
was a conscious
is not,
decision,
you know,
right? That was a conscious choice
yeah,
on their part to, number one, focus on young people, to be in a position to be seen as a Black man differently with young people. I think that conscious choice is a really important aspect here, in what you're doing. And while I'm kind of down on the system of education, I have to say that it's people and relationships and teachers and artist teachers that I had that made the difference in my life. And during this pandemic, and I like to think of it where we're excavating our humanity, having a chance to, um, I've been doing a lot of gatherings or holding circles, holding conversations. And really a lot of that is about listening. And I think that's something that doesn't happen enough. That while you're talking, I could be thinking all the time about what I need to be saying, but then I'm not listening to you. I'm not really listening to you. So I can come back and I can say what I have to say, but is it based on what I heard you say, or based on what I think I should be saying, or what I need to say for me? I mean, of course it will, change from time to time, but I think that basic idea of developing the skill of not only putting yourself out in situations that might be uncomfortable for you at some point, or taking a risk in a way, but also being open, right? Being open to possibility, and to really truly listen, you have to be open to a lot of possibilities. And I think that that's something that I know I'm really working on. I think as we come together again, as we come in circles, and I'm hoping, addressing some of those kind of rough places that we need to get through culturally. I kind of think about it as, when you go into the ocean, and where the natural water and the ocean meets, it's called the bar. Have you ever been over the bar? Not a bar, but like,
I don't think so.
okay, the ocean bar. Okay, the ocean bar. It's an area that it's an area that in order to get to the ocean, you have to go through, and it's really, really rough. I mean, that's where some boats and ships don't make it past the bar. You have to go through that kind of rough water to get to the other side. So I feel like in our human interactions, listening is a big part of that. And what you're saying too earlier is exploring your own, where you're at. Like, how can you express where you're at if you don't really have a process or a way to question where you're at? It's just about 6:00. Bruce, how did that happen? Wait, we have 6 more things to talk about. No, I'm just,
Oh boy.
we could, so we'll have to.
Time flies. Time flies. I just want to, like I said, we're running up on time. So I just want to, I was going to respond to that in saying that, yeah, it's, it's difficult, but also, we have, again, I think it's just like a matter, you start creating these opportunities, and, it's a part of it requires, and we don't have as much time to get in on this. We kind of talked about it again in one of like pre-meetings about just like where it's really like challenging how we fundamentally think. Like we talk about part of it is, addressing systems of oppression, but then also kind of addressing, human nature and kind of like even just like the systems of communication in general. The idea of how we have where we're kind of prone to think about things in sort of like this binary, this good, bad, you know, right, wrong, et cetera, as opposed to like embracing the gray areas or kind of, just, yeah, being able to hold two thoughts at the same time, being able to kind of like make, you know, be open to new information or, just being able to operate, as being more flexible. And we're all, again, trying to figure out what does that look like? What does that mean? Like I said before, what does it mean to hold yourself accountable in real time? But like I said, I think part of it just comes with experience. Part of it comes with, trying to do things that we're doing, working, if people are going to ask, so, geez, Bruce, what would you suggest to the world? For example, you know, I would just say, getting involved with organizations, working, we are even in some of the most abolitionist spaces, like this whole, American ideal of rugged individualism is not any less prevalent. Really try and identify and challenge that. Work with people, organize with people, put yourself in positions where you will be challenged, where you are going to have to grow and, build relationships. Take some time to do that. Uh, yeah, like this is kind of like, this is lifetime stuff, I guess. We had a thing on there about why abolition, and because white supremacy and other systems of oppression need to be abolished. That's a short answer, but it's long work, it's lifetime work. We're dealing with, just in this, what was it? The Pilgrims arrived in what, the 1400s? Like, I'm not going to live long enough to have as much time to build something, even if I worked every day, every waking hour I had to deal with the system as long as it's been in place before I was here. And we got to keep that in perspective. So I'll turn it over to you to have any parting thoughts for the people.
Well, for you, Bruce, I really appreciate you. And I just want to say, okay, let's just try this. I'm going to say an organization I'm involved with, and you're going to say an organization you're involved with. And we'll just do that for 30 seconds. And our involvement in those organizations may be different, but these are resources. If we add all our resources together, it's pretty impressive, I think. And the relationships, we can't even begin to mention the relationships. But I'm just going to say, well, Vanport Mosaic, since you raised the organization up, is a common one between us. I'm personally involved with the Japanese American Museum of Oregon. Your turn.
Yeah, so I'm a part of Respond to Racism LO. It's a grassroots anti-racist group in Lake Oswego, Oregon. I just put it in the chat on this Facebook page for those listening. Also, it's not really an organization, it's my own project, but I do a series called The Blacktastic Adventure, a virtual exploration of Oregon's Black diaspora, which is an interview series where, just through a small little vehicle of interviews, I, am trying to kind of do some of that work of bridging these gaps, both, geographically, economically, generationally, et cetera, of just, modeling some of those conversations, elevating people's stories. So, if you want to support that work, you can find it, Bruce Poinsett on YouTube. And I guess I can put the link to that in the chat on Facebook as well. Why not?
Because you can do that, and I'm slower at doing that. I should have made a list. But I'm also with the Oregon Humanities, with the Conversation Project, and I've been leading conversations called Can We Get Along? And I'm on my third year of doing that, holding circles, bringing people together all across the state of Oregon, which has been really an honor and an education for me. I learn as much about myself in those circles as I do, bringing people together and listening to their stories and their histories. Your turn.
Yeah, I mean, I'm involved with, besides groups I said, also I do work with literary arts, work with the University of Oregon DEI department. I honestly I contract all over with groups that kind of, again, in the nonprofit arts, social justice space. So, I'm around. And yeah, I guess, is there anything else?
Well, I have one more that I'm really, and we're going to have to sign off because I think we could keep going for a while. But I have had a deep, I guess, deep belief in that there should be no war, and we should not be killing each other, and there should be no nuclear weapons on the planet that allow for that to an extreme direction. So I work with, as an advisory committee member with the Physicians for Social Responsibility. And with that, we've just brought on a whole new group of Black, Indigenous, people of color onto our board for the first time. So it's like transitioning. And so I'm holding space for people to come together to talk as they come into a new organization, and have a space and a place to meet each other, to discuss what their work is about and kind of what their experience is within the organization, so we can give feedback to the organization as well about how they could do things better or differently, that services or speaks toward the people of color within their organization and outside of it. I think that's it, Bruce. I think we got to call it a wrap.
Wait, I got one more.
Okay.
I got one more thing.
One more. No,
I just want to, two things. First, I just want to thank Aaron from Vanport Mosaic.
Oh, yeah.
Who's been behind the scenes, putting this on, live streaming, making, monitoring things, for one, just doing that, but also being patient with us as we ran a little bit over today. And I'm just going to say this one more thing and then I'm done. I promise. You talk about PSR, and I also had the opportunity to work with them, and for just as a judge for their student essay contest a couple of years ago. So it's an awesome organization. And you talk about anti-war advocacy. Again, I don't want to get us into another 2-hour-long conversation, but I would just say, for those who haven't really kind of like engaged with, maybe not necessarily like advocacy, but just like really like looking into these stories and like, things that our military does abroad, that there's a direct connection to what happens here. The toys the police use on us here, they test them out abroad. As far as getting consent to dehumanize people so that they can, do things like targeted drone strikes on, entire communities. Like, that same dehumanization is used in the rhetoric here to, again, justify violence here. It's interconnected. You can look at many stories, Iran, Contra, et cetera, or if you really want to look at the direct connections between these policies. Again, I don't want to, we could schedule, another
racism
2
and
hour.
militarization. I think that may be on the list of many topics to come. Thank you, Vanport Mosaic. Thank you, Aaron Schmidt. Thank you, Laura Laforti. Thank you, Bruce Poinsett, for a wonderful conversation. To be continued.
Yes, to be continued. Thank you all. And have a good night, everyone.
Have a great night.